ये क्या हाल बना रखा है?
इंजीनियरिंग तो पढ़ ली लेकिन प्रैक्टिकल नहीं सीखे। करता कुछ हूँ, होता कुछ और है। भाई इस बार ना मेरा फेल होना पक्का है।
ऐसी पढ़ाई का क्या मतलब जिसमें हो नो प्रैक्टिकल्स? चुपचाप जाओ इंटर्नशाला ट्रेनिंग्स पे। यहाँ है 3D प्रिंटिंग, रियल एसआई, वेब एंड ऐप डेवलपमेंट, प्रैक्टिकल लर्निंग वाली ट्रेनिंग्स। ट्रेनिंग सेलेक्ट करो और थ्योरी के साथ प्रैक्टिकल भी सीखो। इंटर्नशाला ट्रेनिंग्स, शुरुआत यहीं से।
Hello and good evening, everyone. I am your host Manpreet. Welcome to the fifth season of IST Practicals by Internshala Trainings. IST Practicals is a series of three online masterclasses delivered by industry experts. These 45-minute sessions are all about teaching students important concepts, softwares, and tools. Every IST Practical is an opportunity to experience the power of practical learning. The topic of today's session is animation with After Effects, and our teacher today is Ozgur. He is an award winning filmmaker, motion graphics artist, and educator. He is the author of multiple bestseller animation training series and is an Adobe certified expert and instructor for After Effects, Premiere Pro, Photoshop, and Illustrator. He is also one of the very few people in the world to be awarded the Master Trainer title by Maxon for Cinema 4D. He has both worked for and trained companies such as the BBC, Disney, Sony, Google, and Microsoft. I hope you will enjoy this webinar with him. We have a very special gift for you at the end, so stay tuned for that. तो चलिए करते हैं एनिमेशन की शुरुआत यहीं से, and let's welcome Ozgur.
Thanks, Manpreet. Hi, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm calling in from London, UK. So it's just afternoon here. I'm very excited to be doing this session with you on particles in After Effects. So as Manpreet mentioned, my name is Ozgur. I work in the industry. I am an animator. I do motion design and I teach as well. I teach After Effects and Cinema 4D mainly. And today we'll be talking about particles in After Effects. I've got a little presentation here that I'm going to go through real quick. So first of all, before we actually start, I want to find out whether you people have used particles before in any of your projects. So we have a live chat going on the side of the video. It would be great if you can participate as well. So let us know on the side of the video whether or not you've used particles before. I'm gonna keep an eye on the chat here as well while I speak. So it'd be interesting to find out who is familiar with particles, who's used them before, and whether or not that's something completely new to you. So let me know whether or not you have any experience with particles on the side. You can see you already started putting your answers here. No particle experience. No experience. I'm reading still. I'm expecting one person to say yes. No one has experience. Great, that should be interesting for you then. Okay, so particles are amazing. I'll show you a couple of examples with particles before we crack on. And I'm sure you'll like them as much as I do. And hopefully by the end of the session, you'll want to start using them right away as well. Great. So what we'll be covering today is going to be primarily the built-in particle effects within After Effects. We'll start with the simple ones. Some of them aren't actually categorized as particle effects, but they do indeed create particles as a result. And then we'll move on to the more advanced ones. And I'll also show you a kind of industry standard plugin that we use for particles as well called Particular. So particles will be used to create different elements like background elements, or we can use them to reveal logos and text elements as well. And things like fireworks, sparks, anything that looks fancy and interesting, you actually use particles for. So the actual effects that we'll be using today, we'll start with the CC ball action effect, which, like I said, isn't quite a particle effect, but it does indeed turn your layers into small particles. We'll also talk about the very simple foam effect, which can be quite exciting to use as well. And then we'll move on to the more advanced ones like particle playground. And then we'll talk more about the particle systems effect. These are all built into After Effects. And then the 3D version of that, which is the particle world effect. So these are the built-in effects to After Effects. And then at the very end, like I said, we'll have a brief look at the Trapcode particular plugin as well, which I recommend you definitely check out as well at the end of the session. So let's crack on. I'm going to start my After Effects screen. Just give me 1 second. As I talk, if you have any questions, I'm keeping an eye on the chat as well. So do fire questions away, and Manpreet is going to be here to help me out as well. Thanks, Manpreet. And at the very end, we'll do a quick Q&A session as well before we wrap up. So, like I said, I'm going to start with the CC ball action effect. And for all the particle effects in After Effects, we're going to need to create a composition. And then within the composition, we're going to need to have a layer. And usually this layer becomes a solid layer. And then you apply your particle effects to the solid layer. It doesn't have to be a solid layer. You could apply the effect to anything, but it's easier to just work with a solid. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a composition by going to composition up here and then new composition. And then it doesn't really matter what the settings of the composition that you use are. I'm just going to go and call this one CC ball action. So we keep track of what we're doing. Like I said, the settings aren't very important for what we're going to be learning today. And within this, like I said, I'm going to create a solid as well, so I can convert the solid into particles. So I'm going to go to Layer, New Solid. Again, the name of the solid or the color isn't important. The size is important though. So the size of the shape that you're creating here needs to match the size of your composition. Otherwise, you're going to have some cutoffs around the edges. So I'm going to leave the same settings as the composition size settings. But like I said, the color isn't important. I'm going to go and press OK. Here we have a solid, a white solid. And before I actually apply the effect to it, I want to convert the shape or the color of the solid to be a bit more interesting. It would work without as well, but I just want to make this look a little more interesting for you guys. So I'm going to go and apply an effect called, say, 4-color gradient, just so that we have some more interesting layers to look at rather than just a plain color. So I apply the effect by double-clicking on it. And now here's the effect on the layer. You can move the contents of the effect like that as well. I'm assuming that you already know how to use After Effects to an extent. So I'm not covering the basics of it. There are quite a few resources, both on Internshala and on their YouTube channel as well. So you should check them out if you don't know how to use After Effects. But with this color gradient applied, I'm going to start with the first effect that we have, which is the CC ball action effect. So I'm just going to go and search for ball action. Here's the effect. I can either go and double click on this to apply it, or just click and drag over to the layer. And as soon as I do this, what happens first is that the layer becomes almost pixelated. So we start seeing some small pixels on the layer. These aren't quite pixels. What happens is the layer itself turns into small balls. That's what the name of the effect is, the ball action. And then you can change how close those balls are to each other by changing the properties of the effect here. So first of all, where it says grid spacing, this is referring to the grid shape that we ended up with here. I can click and reduce this. Let's see if I lower this down. I now have a denser layout. If I zoom in, you see the grid is smaller now. But the thing that makes this effect interesting is the scatter option. At the top, if I go to where it says scatter, click and drag this towards right, the layer starts breaking apart. Those little balls that we have are now breaking apart into smaller pieces, and the further I go, the more separated they become. This is already quite a cool effect. And this is why I changed the color of the layer as well, so we could have these different colors. But if you didn't apply the color gradient effect, this is what you'd end up with, just the white balls there. I can turn this back on. There are a couple of other effects with this, or a couple of different settings with this effect. So if I set the scatter back to its default 0, so they go back to how they were before, I'm going to change my grid spacing back to its default 5 as well. There. So that's a little larger. We can, as well as scattering it, we can also rotate this layer, and this actually works in kind of a 3D fashion. So if I go to rotation here and then increase this, this starts rotating the layer along the x-axis like this. Like that. I can do the same on the y-axis as well here. So I can rotate it that way or that way. Or if I set this back to 0, I can actually twist the layer as well. This is also quite an interesting thing. If I go to where it says twist angle, drag towards right, this is twisting the layer now. Let me just make this a little more obvious by changing the angle to y-axis. And if I twist it that way, you see that's what's happening now. I'm twisting the layer like that. So this is happening in 3D, so it's kind of twisting it like that. I can also, of course, change the axis from Y to anything else. This will make sense if you know how to work with 3D elements in After Effects, which I'm assuming some of you do. I'm going to go back up. And you can, of course, keyframe all of these. So let me set this back to 0. In order to keyframe the content, instead of actually doing this on a random looking layer like this, I'm going to go and replace this content or the layer with a logo. And I'm going to do this just for the time being by turning off the layer. Going back to my project panel, I have a logo prepared here already. I'm going to just drag this in here. Maybe make this slightly smaller. So the logo or any text layer or any layer for that matter can be broken into smaller pieces as well. So if I apply this here, now the logo becomes kind of pixelated. And then I can scatter this. It breaks this apart. If you're getting this result, by the way, where the layer is being cut off, this is because of the same problem I mentioned earlier, where the layer size isn't the same as the composition size. Let me quickly fix that. I'm going to delete this effect. I'll take this single layer we have here, and a way to fix this in After Effects to make the size of the layer, the bounding box of the layer, the same as the composition is by creating a pre-comp from the single layer by going to Layer, Pre-compose, and then I'll move all the attributes into the new composition by pressing OK here. Now the size of the layer becomes the same size as the composition. Then I can apply the effect. Then the layer becomes pixelated or bolified, if you like. And then I can scatter this to break this apart. And at this state, I can go and keyframe it. Then I go forward, let's say to 3 seconds, and then drop this back down to 0. And that creates the second keyframe, of course. And I can see the keyframes by pressing U on the keyboard. There are my 2 keyframes. If I now go back and play it, here's a very simple animation of creating or assembling a file, a logo. This could be anything. It doesn't have to be a logo. Like I said, it could be anything. If you wanted to make these balls smaller, you go to where it says grid spacing first. You can drop this down to, let's say, 2. And also the ball size here can be adjusted. You can make them bigger or smaller from here as well. So you have more of a digital look here. Then if I go back and play, here's the result. So this is the first effect I wanted to show you. You can break a layer into smaller pieces like this by using the CC ball action effect. Next one I'm going to show you is closer to working with particles, and that's called the foam effect. So I'm going to create a new composition for this by pressing Command or Control if you're using PC, and N for new. And I'm going to leave the same settings. I'm just going to name this one foam, so we keep track of what we're doing. And within this, there you go. Within this, I'm going to create one more solid. The shortcut for that is Control or Command Y, or you could go to Layer, New Solid. And again, the settings are fine as before. I'm going to press OK. And then I'm going to apply the foam effect to this. So I'm just going to go and drag this over or double click as well. Now with the particle effects, usually when you apply them, they look a bit basic, to say the least. And that's because it takes quite a while for the computer to process these particle effects. So After Effects tries to make them go faster by making them look not so good initially. So the good example of this is the foam effect. If I play it, if I zoom in once, you can see it doesn't really look, that interesting. So we get these weird looking wireframes, the blue wireframes. Right away, if you want to make this look quite close to what it will look like in the final render, I can go to where it says View, change the mode from Draft to Rendered. And that's what the result's going to be eventually when we render this out. Okay. Now I'm going to explain a few things on on this effect, on the particle effect, I'm keeping an eye on the chat as well while I talk. So if I stall for a second, that's what's happening. I'm gonna keep going back and forth between the chat. I think a few people said about the quality of the video. That must be the video settings on your player. So make sure that that's set to its highest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and explain a few things on this particle effect, the foam effect, and then a few more things on the other ones. So in the end, you can combine them all. So I'm not going to go through every single property of this effect. I'll just explain a few useful ones here. So with all the particle effects, you have something called an emitter or a producer. So inside the producer here, you get the settings of it. What the word producer or emitter in some other effects means is that where these particles are created from. You know, do they start right from the center of the composition? Do they start from the top left? Does that position change? That's what it's referring to. So I can click and drag these numbers around. So you see the emitter moves around, or I can click on this crosshair here as well and move this around. So that's updating the producer point or the emitter point. You also have the size of the emitters or the producers down here. That's the X size, the horizontal size. So you can widen them out. And the Y size as well, that's the vertical size, that way. Then you have the production rate or the emission rate. This is for how many of these particles do you want, so how dense the result's going to be. The higher this number, the more particles you'll end up with. The fewer particles you want, the lower this number needs to be. I'll stop this and go back to the beginning. Now, a few more things I want to show you is first, you don't have to stick to this actual shape of these random looking bubbles. You have quite a few other options here. If I go down to where it says rendering, then there's the bubble texture. So that's referring to what here is. I can change it from the default to any of these others. Let's say if I change it to, say, the water beads, that's what that looks like. And of course, the background here is transparent, so it's not black. You could be using any background you like. If I turn this on, you see we have a transparent background, not just black. You can change it to anything else, let's say red tide. That's what that looks like. Or the great thing about this effect is that you can actually use a custom shape. So you can build a shape yourself, both in After Effects or outside of it, say using Photoshop or Illustrator. You can take a logo, anything you like, you can turn into particles. So let me show you how that works as well before we move from this effect to the next one that I'll show you. So if I go to my project panel, I have here another layer. So this is something I prepared in Illustrator real quick. And so this is what that looks like, just a heart shape. So what I'm going to do is to take this heart, it's a PNG, it could be a JPEG, it could be a PSD file, doesn't really matter. I'm going to take this file, drop this inside the same composition. So this now lives here as well. Let me just turn off the checkerboard pattern in the background. So I'm going to turn this off, and I'm going to add the heart into this composition. And in order to turn these objects here into the heart shapes, I'll go to the effect of the solid, which has the foam effect applied. And I'm going to change the bubble texture from whatever you've selected here to user defined. And now it's expecting us to tell it which layer we want to use as our reference layer for these particles. Well, since I already have the heart here, I'm going to go to where it says bubble texture layer, change it from none to my heart layer. And lo and behold, we now have those heart shapes scattered around the scene. If I go back, and I can turn this off as well, by the way. I can just go here, turn off this layer, so the original one disappears. I'm just left with the particles that are based on the heart. I'll go back. And you can go and animate the position of this as well. So if I go to the foam effect, click on this so I can get the icon here. I can now go from left to right and just animate it. Let me do that real quick. If I go to the beginning, start this, say on the left-hand side, keyframe the producer point, go forward, let's say to 3 seconds or so, and then drag this over to the right. And now if I go back and play it, let me zoom in. If I go and play it now, this is what we have. So we have these hearts going from left to right, which is a pretty cool effect, I think. And of course, it doesn't have to be this heart. It could be anything you like. So if I go back to my hard layer updated with something, that would be the result that we would get. So this could be a particle that you can customize really nicely. So that's the second one I wanted to show you, the particle, the foam effect. The third one, which is a little more interesting, I think, is called particle playground. So that's what I'm going to show you now in a new composition. Again, a new comp, and I'm going to call this one particle playground. That's the name of the effect I'll be using. And again, I'm going to create a new solid. So Command Y. Settings aren't important apart from the size. Size is important, so it needs to be the same as the composition size. Then I'll press enter. And the effect I'm after is the particle playground. So I'm going to search for particle. And this is the one, particle playground. I'll apply it. Now what this does is, if I play it, is it shoots out, let me zoom in, is it shoots out these little blocks of particles. It doesn't look very interesting, again, for the same reason, because After Effects is trying to keep things quick. So it's trying to make things go faster as it previews. But you can change all of this, and I will. This is coming out of a producer or an emitter called the Canon emitter. These are the settings here that we have for the Canon emitter that creates these particles. So the first option we have here is the barrel radius. Let me zoom in here. So this barrel radius is the point from which these particles are created. So by default, it comes from a single point, but it can expand it. So if I expand this from 0 to something higher, you see these particles are created from a wider range. That makes it a little more separated from each other, like that. I'll bring this back down to 0. Go back. Then you have the particles per second. This is actually how many particles you have per second, so it's not an arbitrary number. So if I set that to, let's say, 1, every second, that's going to shoot out 1 particle, like this. I'm going to increase this again, then go back. So I have a lot more particles per second. You have the direction. So this is how the particles are kind of created, in which direction they're created. I can change this or that way. But the interesting thing with this is that it's not just being created in one direction. It's getting created, and then gravity is actually pulling them down. So if I play it, you see they get born from this direction, and then there's gravity that pulls them down, which is also quite interesting. I can change the gravity actually. Down here, there's the gravity option. If I go in, I can change the strength or the force of the gravity by increasing this, so it's stronger, so it pulls the particles down faster or quicker. I can lower this down, or in fact, I can set this to a negative number to get the objects to float up. So for example, if I go to the direction, push this down so the particles are being emitted downwards, then if I go to the force and then drag this towards a negative number, so they first get pushed down, and then the gravity actually is reversed or inversed, so it kind of pulls them all up again. So it looks like this. You may be saying, well, what do I use these particle effects for? Well, for all sorts of different things that I'll show you in a moment as well, with a quick video clip. But you can combine them with other effects as well. For example, let's say you wanted to turn this into some smoke pattern. Well, first of all, smoke hopefully would be gray, unless it's a toxic kind of color. So I can make it gray from here. I can combine this with another effect, let's say like, I don't know, a blur effect. So if I search for a blur effect, apply this to the same layer, I can blur this, and there you go, you have some rudimentary smoke there now. And you can then attach this to the tail of another layer, let's say, or if you have some, I don't know, let's say some car driving, and you wanted this to be attached to the exhaust pipe or the engine side, you can actually do that with some tracking, motion tracking, and this could become your smoke for the visual effects that you're creating. I'm going to go back, and let me kill this blur effect. With this one also, quite interesting, you can change this option where it says wall, and you can add a boundary to it. What I mean by that is if I go and draw a mask, this only works with a mask. So the layer is highlighted. I can draw a mask, any kind of mask that I like here. And if I set the boundary to be that mask, the particles will bounce off that mask like that. as I move this around, you see, I can use this as my boundary and all the particles will bounce off that mask now. So I can control the direction of the particles. Very helpful. One last thing I want to show you with this effect is you can actually use it to break a layer apart into smaller pieces as well. So let me show you that real quick. I'm going to go ahead and reset the effect first. I'll go ahead and delete my mask. I'll go ahead and bring a layer in. So I'm going to use the same layer as before. Let's say my logo here. Or let's do it with the heart, so it's going to be quicker because it's a smaller shape. I can go to the beginning. I can turn the cannon off by going to where it says particles per second and setting this to 0. So no particles are created anymore. I can come down to where it says layer exploder. This will take a layer, if I open this up, this will take a layer like this heart, break it into smaller particles, and then those particles can be animated using these options here. So I'm going to go to where it says explode layer, change it from none to my heart layer, and then I'll actually turn off the heart layer here. You see now the heart turns into small particles based on the setting here where it says radius of new particles. I can drop this down to be even smaller, let's say 1, so I have smaller particles. If I play it, those particles become their own emitter, so they keep kind of pushing out new particles every frame. I don't want that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn or keyframe this. So I'm going to go to the beginning, keyframe this radius of new particles at the very beginning at 1. Then I'll go forward by 1 frame by pressing page down on my keyboard. I'll then set this to 0. So no more particles are created. And if I go back and play it, the heart turns into small particles and then it stops creating particles. And this is the result now. So you can break an object apart as well like that. And of course, because of the gravity force, it's just kind of falling down. But you can change the direction of the gravity, or you can change the force to be negative. So if I pull this back towards left, and maybe give it some different direction like that, maybe. So this will now start blowing away. Just like that. That's another cool feature of the particle playground effect. Now, before I move on to the slightly more advanced particle effects for the next kind of 10 minutes or so, I've got a quick quiz that I'm going to share my screen with in a sec. So let's see. Let me just see if I can bring this up. Give me 1 second. Right. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions from here now. So this is the Internshala's interface as well. So if you sign up for any of the courses, this is the kind of type of quizzes that you'll be seeing as well. So the first question I have for you, and I'd like this to be a little more interactive if you can, is in the particle playground effect, the one I just showed you, which method or methods would you use in order to limit the particles to be within a certain shape or an area? So we looked at how to kind of push things around that shape I had. So what kind of effect or what kind of tool would I have to use? Would it be a solid that I had to use, a shape, a mask, or could all of this be used? What are your answers? I'm interested in hearing how much attention you guys have been paying. Samriti says C. Subankar says mask. Great. Subankar says C. Great. Senha C. Great. Okay, I'm glad you've been listening. So yes, it is a mask. So you can only do this with a mask. You need to create a mask like I did using the pen tool or any other tool. And then you can use the boundary effect to limit that to be within that mask. So that's it. So using a mask is the correct one. Well done. Next one. How can I break a layer into smaller pieces like I showed you earlier? Would it be the layer map? Would it be the layer exploder? Or can we import a layer directly into the effect? Or can I do all of this? How can I break a layer, say a logo or some text, into smaller particles by using which one of these options? So A would be to use the layer map option. B would be to use the layer exploder option. C, I can import it directly into the effect. Or D, all of the above. I'm waiting for your answers as well now. Kunal says B. Devil Graphics says B. Jashan says B. Cosmic Being B. I see some D options as well. It's not D. you can only do this by using the layer exploder option. So that's the one that we can use only by using the layer exploder in After Effects. So this is what that effect was here. If you remember layer exploder, this is what we used. Great, so that was it. So let me now move on to the other two effects I'll show you before we wrap up. So I'm going to create one more composition. And this next one is going to be the particle systems. Actually, it's called particle systems 2 effect. And I'm going to apply that effect here, particle systems 2. But I need, of course, a solid before I can apply that. So I'm going to go and create a solid first. Apply the particle systems 2 effect to the solid. And this is what that looks like now if I play it. Looks a bit crazy. I'll stop the playback. Now, with this one, we have a couple of different options here as well. So there's the birth rate, very similar to what we had before, like the production rate. I can lower this down, so I have fewer particles per second. There's the longevity, that's how long they stay on screen for. So I can make it shorter or longer. This is in seconds. Then there's the producer. That's where the particles are actually created from. So that's this producer here. You can change the radius of that as well. You can make it wider on the X, wider on the Y. But instead of seeing these lines here, let me just lower these down again. So let's say 5 by 5. Instead of seeing these lines, I can change the particle type from line to one of these other built-in options. For example, if I go and change it to faded sphere, that's what that looks like. Quite nice. I can have more particles if I increase the birth rate. I can have more particles as well. Like that. You have these other options as well. You can create cubes, different shapes. These different polygon options here. If I go to, say, a bubble, that's what that looks like the foam. I'm going to go back to, or you can create stars as well, like this. I'm going to go back to the faded sphere. And I can actually use this, or I do actually use this for some nice background elements as well. I'll show you that in just a second. First, if you want to change the color of this, you see this has two colors. So they're born yellow or brighter. And as they die, they turn darker. They turn more orange here. That's these two colors. I can change them. So when they're born, they can be, let's say, blue. As they die, they can be, let's say, green. And this happens over that many seconds. So for each particle, 3.3 seconds is the lifetime. If I set that to, let's say, 1, it only takes 1 second for the particles to go from the first color, blue, to their final color, green. Now, there's also the physics here as well. You see this is kind of an explosion animation. So it kind of explodes out to create these particles. You can change it from explosive to, say, a vortex animation. And this will actually start spiraling upwards like a vortex would. If I lower this position down here, that's something else you can create. Or you have a couple of different options as well here. I had the twirl. If I push this back up, this is more like a galaxy now twirling like that. There's the velocity. So these are quite self-explanatory. So that's the speed of the particles. I can lower these down. There's gravity as well. I can lower the gravity down as well. So they're born and they kind of just come towards us, but they don't fall down. If I actually extend my radius X and radius Y, I can create a field of particles like this. And this can be quite an interesting background element, maybe, when you're creating backgrounds. And of course, you can animate all of these as well. You can keyframe all of them. You can set the position keyframe for the producer, and then go to a different frame, change the position so the actual producer can move around. And you can actually use that to hide elements as well. Let's say if you place this in front of a logo and then create lots of particles, and then behind the particles, you'd have the logo. And as the particles die out, the logo would be revealed. That would be a nice way of cheating a reveal effect. There's the 3D version of the particle system as effect. It's very similar. Let me just stop this and create a new composition. I'm going to call this one particle world. This is the effect. I'm going to create a solid. This is the effect, CC particle world. I'll apply this. It's very, very similar. When I play it, it's got the same lines. The only difference with this, though, is that this works in 3D, whereas the first one, the Particle Systems 2, works only in 2D. So whenever you have an effect that's got this little cube icon next to it, this actually means that you would apply this effect to a 2D layer, and the result would be a 3D result. So it turns the effect into a 3D effect. What I mean by that is this. If I go to the particle type, change it from, let's say, the default line to, again, the faded sphere. So we have these small spheres again. I'm not going to bother with the rest of the settings just for the time being. But if I now come up to this little gizmo here, I can click and drag this around, and I can actually see this from different perspectives in 3D space. This is something that the Particle Systems 2 effect, this one, wouldn't let you do. So this actually works in full 3D. If you know how to work in 3D, you can create a camera, fly through this. You can create 3D elements like text, lights, whatever, and then interact with these particles. That's pretty much the only, not the only, but that's the most important difference between the particle world and the particle systems effect. It works in 3D, whereas the first one only works in 2D. So I definitely recommend checking this effect out as well if you know how to use 3D. And I'm going to show you one last thing. And before I do, I'm going to switch over to some questions. So let me just switch back here. So going back to what we just covered about the particle systems effect, how can we, in that effect, the particle systems 2 effect, how can we make the particles float upwards rather than falling down? What property would I use to make them go up rather than come down? So looking forward to your answers. So we can change the particle velocity to do this. We can change the gravity, or by changing the resistance, or all of the above. Which one of these options would I use if I wanted the particles to move up rather than down? Let's say you're creating an underwater scene and you have some bubbles that you want to kind of float up. I'm getting some answers. Yeah, Kunal says B, Atsu says B, Niran, Devil Graphics, yeah. Samaradi, gravity, yeah, you got it all. So it's the gravity. You just inverse the gravity. You have a negative number for gravity, and things will start floating up rather than falling down. So well done for those who said gravity. It's not velocity, it's the gravity. So well done if you said that. I'm going to select gravity, submit. And the final question I have is, which one of the effects below works in 3D as opposed to 2D? So we talked about foam, we talked about the particle playground, we talked about the particle systems 2, and then also particle world. Which one of these works in 3D? I'm looking at your answers as well. Great, you've all been paying attention. Great. Particle world. Yep, you got it. So it's the CC particle world is the one that works in 3D. Also, the ball action, the one that I showed you right at the beginning, works in 3D as well, but it's not part of the answers here. So that's why in this one, it's the particle world. That's the correct one. So well done if you said D. And if you didn't say D, watch the sections again, and hopefully you'll get it. So before I wrap up, the last thing I want to show you is a plugin which I absolutely love and use all the time, and it's called Particular. It's not built in to After Effects. So all of these effects that I showed you so far are all part of After Effects. So if you have your license for After Effects, you'll have access to all of these effects that I just showed you. But there's one more plugin which is amazing called Particular. And I want to finish up with that one. I'm just going to show you a quick show reel of Particular so you have an understanding of how that works. I'm going to open this up. It's only about a minute long, so I'm going to ask you to watch this real quick. So this is what you can create with the particle plugin called Particular. So have a look. So I'm going to show you, let me stop this. I'm going to show you real quick where that plugin is, how to find it. It's by a company called Red Giant. So you should definitely check that out. It's called Red Giant Particular. And the way that works within After Effects is, again, you create a composition, you create a solid, and then you apply. This is the effect that you probably won't have on your computer unless you purchase the plugin. This is the trap code Particular. You'll apply this to the layer. It's going to take a second to think about it. And then once it applies it, it actually comes with its own interface. I'll show you once it kind of loads up. It's going to come with its own interface. And it's not too difficult to control. It's got quite a few settings that you need to be aware of. But once you kind of get the hang of it, it's actually quite an easy effect to use. It can be really complicated if you are creating some complex animations. But if you want to create some simple things like, I don't know, maybe explosions or some sparks coming out, it's not that difficult to play with. So the effect gets applied just like any other particle effect. But in addition to what we've talked about, this comes with what's called its own designer. And when you click on the designer button, this comes up. And then this is almost like a separate application within After Effects. And you have all of these presets that you can use. There's some amazing stuff in here. You can create explosions, and this is all interactive. You can click anywhere around to control these settings, all of these different elements. You have the motion graphics elements, and all you do when you apply them, you just click and drag your mouse around, and these particles are created. There's some crazy things that you can create with this. There's some splatters, explosions, things like that. And you can change all of the properties as well, of course. So once you have this, if you don't like the color, you go to the color settings here, you update it to something else. Let's say you bring in, I don't know, a green color or something. And then this updates. And if you like the result, you just go and press apply. And then it takes all these settings, applies them to your layer. And then your layer now turns into this effect. You can create crazy elements with this. So it's definitely worth checking out. And that's what I'm going to finish on. If you're into using particles, definitely once you learn the basic foundational particle effects in After Effects, definitely check this one out called Trap Code Particular. And that's going to be it from me. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for sticking until this last moment. And I'm going to hand it over to Manpreet now. And if you have any questions, I'll be looking on the chat side of the things as well. So that's going to be it from me. So thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ozgur. Thank you so much for the incredible session. I'm sure we all got to learn a lot of new things today. So
That's good
before
to
we
hear.
open the floor to our audience, I want to ask you a question. So my question is that as somebody who is eagerly interested in learning more about this domain of animation, what is the right path for me and what are some future prospects?
So animation is a huge subject. So it can be divided into smaller sections. So depending on the interest of the person, you could be an animator and work for, I don't know, Disney. You could be an animator and work for a PR agency. You could be an animator and work for commercials. You could be an animator, work for a broadcaster. So depending on what interests you, you need to kind of pick a path yourself. But it's such a huge subject. But once you learn the foundations of it, I think that's when you decide, which area you want to get more into, whether you want to do cartoons, whether you want to do commercials, motion graphics, visual effects is another huge part, motion graphics as well. You can do 2D or 3D animation. It's a vast subject, and it's very valid in this day and age. It's used everywhere. You see animation anywhere you look, on TV, on films, social media. So wherever you have some visuals, animation is probably going to be part of those visuals that you see, including titles as well. So it's a huge, it's got a lot of prospects.
That's right. And for all of you who eagerly want to learn what's ahead from here, Internshala Trainings has a special training on animation, and you all can just go and check that out. We are offering a 10% discount on that training and other 70 plus practical based online trainings that are available on our platform. So you all can just click on the link in the description and go check them out. And now we can take your questions, so you all can just type them in the chat. And Oscar, if you could please answer them.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm just looking at the chat here as well. If anyone has any questions, feel free to fire away. I'm just looking at the chat as I speak. Samriti says, how to make animations more fun? That's a really open-ended question, Samriti. It depends on your definition of fun, I guess. Do you mean how to make them fun and have fun while you're making them? Or how to make the animations look more interesting for other people? It depends on what you mean by the word fun. But that's a really, it's a difficult question. It's an open-ended question. It depends on what you mean by fun. Is it hard to learn? It's not hard to learn. I think it's hard to be really good at it. So learning it is like learning any skill. The more you spend time on using the software, the better you'll get at it. But in order to actually master it and then be really good at it, it does take some time. There's principles that you need to learn, animation principles, as well as, of course, having technical skills. That's when having a course, like Manpreet just mentioned, can really be helpful to learn the basics, at least to get you up from that basic level to a level where you can actually start exploring. So once you do the course, once you spend some time researching, you watch YouTube videos, you practice and practice and practice, it becomes easier and easier to learn. Where to get the software? Divakar is asking. So the software I was using earlier is After Effects, and it's an Adobe software. So you just go to adobe.com. That's where you can get the software from. You purchase the license, but they also have a free trial. I believe it's 7 days that you can use it for free, just to experiment with it. So it's adobe.com, adobe.com. Is there a free Adobe software for students? There's not, as far as I'm aware, it's not free for students, but you do get a really good discount. If you're a student, you get some really good deals on the software. It's not free, I don't think, but check on their website, and they should have all the licensing options for students as well. And it's a really decent pricing system that they have for students, as far as I'm aware.
Right. I think, Ozgur, that would be all since we're short on time. Thank you so much for this awesome session, and thanks everyone for joining. Don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel and press that bell icon to never miss another update regarding our upcoming events. You can also join our Telegram channel and get updates regarding more such live events. The link is in the video's description. So see you all soon. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, man.
क्या हुआ बे? अबे रॉकेट काहे बने हुए हो?
ग्रेजुएशन के लिए सिर्फ 4 महीने बचे और समझ नहीं आ रहा आगे क्या करूं। शुरू कहां से करूं?
अबे इंटर्नशाला ट्रेनिंग से मैं बताता हूँ। यहाँ है मशीन लर्निंग, जावा, HR, टैली जैसे बहुत सारे करियर बिल्डिंग ट्रेनिंग्स। ट्रेनिंग सेलेक्ट कर और अपना करियर शुरू कर। इंटर्नशाला ट्रेनिंग्स, शुरुआत यहीं से।